Hei. Jeg vet ikke om hun i nærheten. Hun kom, altså jeg vet ikke om hun kommer nå Hallo? Hallo alle sammen, velkommen hit til Røverstaden, som da holder til i gamle klubbhuslokaler. Og jeg heter Lasse Tømte, har blitt skremt ut hit for å representere kontinuitet fra gamle klubbhus. Jeg bodde på klubbhus, men så viser det seg at det en som heter Hildegunn, som har enda lengre fartstid. For hun var med å flytte klubbhus fra kongen fra Kilen og hit i 1971. Så det noen av oss som holder kontinuiteten gående. Og da det bare riktig selvfølgelig å spille noen viser fra denne tida, 70-tallet. Og viser på 70-tallet, det var synonymt med protestviser eller protestviser. Så da begynner vi med det. Kom, hør på meg, mennesker, hvis dere kan, og innrøm at dere omgitt av vann, og at dere har synket så djupt det går an. Hvis livet for dere har mening, så det på tida å ro seg i land, for en ny tid i emning. Kom storting og styringsverk, merk mine ord. Vi skal flytte inn nye folk der dere bor, og husk vår tålmodighet ikke stor. Og vi har ligget lenge i trening, best for dere å pusse opp stoler og bord, for en ny tid i emning. Kom, hør på meg, generasjon fra i går. Kritiser ikke det dere ikke forstår. Deres barn lyster ikke de ordre de får. Gamle vern for dem blitt av hemning. De vil rykke fram lenger enn dit dere står, for en ny tid i emning. Nå terningen kastet og loddene falt. Det som før smakte søtt, det skal nå smake salt. Det som før kaltes riktig, skal nå hete galt. Dynamitt ligger under hver demning, og den som ingenting eide skal snart alt, for en ny tid i emning. Tusen takk. For ordens skyld så det en sang av Bob Dylan, som da, han var da den urprotestsangeren, oversatt til norsk av Jan Boyer. Siden jeg i gang, altså gamle, hva det de sier, De Lillos, vi skal synge gamle sanger om igjen, og det noen av disse gamle sangene som har blitt aktuelle på grunn av endringer i verden. André Bjerke skrev på sobert riksmål, og han oversatte en sang av Boris Vian som heter Herr President. Den passer i dag, synes jeg. Oversatt til sobert riksmål. Herr President, jeg skrev et brev jeg nu vil sende, for de tid kan hende de leser dette brev. For jeg har mottatt selv et brev fra militæret som sier jeg skal være ved fronten onsdag kveld. Men jeg ble ikke sendt til jorden for å drepe, så meg skal ingen slepe i krig, Herr President. Beklager beklager hvis det gjør dem trist å lese dette. Nå har de altså sett det, jeg vil bli desertør. I krigen har jeg selv sett far og brødre falle. Selv forlot jeg alle de små som gråt farvel. Min mor fant hvilested der ingen sprenggranater og syngende soldater forstyrret hennes fred. De årene jeg satt som fange tok de fra meg den kvinne livet ga meg, mitt hjerte har de tatt. I morgen tidlig går jeg ut av huset før enn det gryr og stenger døren mot livets døde år. Som tigger vil jeg gå på veiene i riket, der vil jeg predike for store og for små. Si nei til dette hat som krigens lov vil fordre, nekt blankt og lystre ordre, bli aldri mer soldat. Herr president, om blod har din uttalt for meget, de bør gi deres eget for slik apostel tro. Men tar de meg så meld til Herren at jeg bare kan skytes uten fare, jeg skyter ikke selv. Tusen takk.
Jeg har en egen mig. Ja. Hei alle sammen. Tor Hugne heter jeg, daglig leder i Sex og Politikk. Tusen takk for at dere har kommet hit. Jeg tenker at dette var en strålende start. Det jo for de av oss som har litt flere grå hår enn andre, så det jo spesielt å være her, som Lasse antydet i sin start på dette årsmøtet. Det jo på mange måter et historisk sted. Det heter altså Røverstaden i dag, og så skal jeg gå over til engelsk og snakke litt om velkomst og sånn, fordi vi skal ha nå, det altså et seminar på 2 timer først, og så skal vi ha da årsmøte etter en liten pause etter det. So I will then switch to English. I wish you all very welcome to our annual meeting, where we'll start with the annual meeting seminar. And for those of us with a few gray hairs, we all know what a historic place we are in. This is my 7th AGM for Sex og Politikk, and this place used to be called Club 7, which is Club 7. It was the alternative place in Oslo when I moved here in 1983, and it was the exciting place to go. It was the place of the hippies. It was the place of drugs and sex and rock and roll. It was really the alternative place. So it's really appropriate that we have our AGM here. So I'm really happy to be here. And I should say a special thank you to Ella, our colleague who proposed this for me. When I saw the address, I thought, oh, that's a address I've seen before. So it used to be a big club downstairs where Lasse and others were doing things that you didn't necessarily do in other places, and discussing things that you didn't necessarily discuss in other places. It was a place where you had a welcoming attitude to all kinds of sexualities. I think genders was not that much an issue those days as it is today, but it was really the open place for all. So I should thank Lasse very much for being the bridge to that past, and for saying that he agreed to play for us. It was, for me, it's, as you understand, nostalgic. But I will turn to the issue of the day for our seminar, which is the sexual and reproductive health and rights response to the crisis in Ukraine. There is much to be said about Ukraine, and there are many things that we are all trying to do. So I'm very happy that we will have a panel here with the main person in our organization working on sexual and reproductive health and rights in crisis situations, as well as colleagues from our organization member associations in Romania and Slovakia that can fill this directly on their work, much more than we do. But first, I will give the floor to our colleague here in Norway, the head of our international team, Christina, that will say a little bit about what has been done so far by Sex og Politikk here in Norway. Christina.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you and welcome. So welcome to this seminar about the war in Ukraine, which we've chose to call Sexual Rights in Crisis. In this seminar, Sex og Politikk, we invite our colleagues from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, to a conversation where we address the consequences the war in Ukraine has for sexual and reproductive health and rights, and how IPPF works to meet the needs of women and girls, both in Ukraine and also its neighboring countries. The war in Ukraine has fatal consequences for the life of Ukrainians. We see an increased numbers of sexual and gender-based violence and the lack of sexual and reproductive health services. In Norway, around 17,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived so far. Sex og Politikk, we have collaborated with the Directorate of Immigration and the Ukrainian organization in Norway regarding information on sexual and reproductive health services here in Norway. We're just finalizing now a brochure for all Ukrainian refugees to receive when arriving Norway, and the brochure is in Ukrainian. And it's about what kind of services are available and what rights they have in Norway. Sex og Politikk has also, together with IPPF, contributed with information and updates from Ukraine, both to the civil society organizations in Norway, but also to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have, amongst others, organized a briefing for all the Nordic ministries of foreign affairs, alerting them on the needs of women and girls in Ukraine and sharing our concerns in regards to the lack of the SRH, sexual and reproductive health services. Today, we will hear more in detail about the situation in Ukraine and also in two of the neighboring countries. And we're very lucky to have colleagues from IPPF present today. So I think I'll just hand over to you, Tor, to introduce the speakers, and welcome everyone.
Thank you very much, Christina. Then I can just welcome our speakers up to the, or our panelists and speakers up to the podium. So it is Julia Taft, who is the director for our Humanitarian office in IPPF. And then we have Susanna Bendikova, who is my colleague as executive director in the Slovakian Member Association of IPPF. And then we have Gabriel Brumariu, who is the project manager from SEX, our Romanian IPPF organization. So welcome to the floor. We are starting with a short introduction, or a proper introduction by Julia, who is going to tell us a bit about the work of IPPF in this area, and particularly the work on Ukraine and the neighboring countries. So Julie, please go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. I first just want to say a huge appreciation to Tor and Christina and everyone at Sex Politikk for this invitation, but also for featuring this really important issue at this annual event, and recognizing that this has been really, I think, a shakeup on the global stage, but also within the humanitarian sector, and certainly really a challenge in many ways for IPPF, but also an opportunity to showcase our huge added value and positioning around the local advantage that our partners have in terms of being able to effectively and quickly launch emergency responses, but also to work in a space that is sexual reproductive health and gender-based violence that is often neglected in humanitarian emergencies, but is really the strength of IPPF's partners. So thank you for that. And just a quick note on the broader humanitarian commitment across IPPF, which has been growing for many years, certainly has predated my arrival and having joined, but really a recognition that while in the beginning perhaps this wasn't the clear mandate of a federation, that because we have such an enormous geographic footprint, that by default, so many of our partners are operating in humanitarian contexts on a day-to-day basis, and that they are already involved in these mechanisms and that really require further investment because the people that they're supporting in these situations are really incredibly vulnerable, and the sexual reproductive health needs are very acute. So IPPF has made a number of commitments and advances over the last few years. One point I want to share is that over the last 8 years, we've seen enormous growth in the number of people served in humanitarian settings. 8 years ago, 1.1 million people were served across the Federation, and just last year, over 6 million. So that's really exponential growth. In the last 18 months, we have supported responses in over 24 countries, and these emergencies have spanned natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, cyclones, the volcano in Tonga, to more protracted crises that are related to conflicts in Democratic Republic of Congo, Yemen, Palestine. So really it's quite an expansive portfolio, but they've been resourced both through donors, government donors, including the Norwegian government, but also through core funds that IPPF has dedicated specifically to support emergency responses, which is around $1.2 million a year. And that was part of a new reform that came out of the reforms over the last 2 years. So just to, I think also in our next strategy, which is the 2023 to 2028 strategy, humanitarian seems to be featuring quite strongly. And this is, again, is coming from the member associations themselves, who identify this as really a critical area of intervention. So just one thing to say is that we are supporting our partners. I'm the humanitarian director. I support a team of 19 people at the secretariat level who are here to support our partners on the ground with technical, operational, safety, security, monitoring, evaluation, all sorts of things. And really the interventions that they're supporting are around access to obstetric care for pregnant women, access to contraception, access to HIV treatment, access to sexually transmitted infection treatment, and access to sexual violence, clinical care, and psychosocial support. So those are the priority interventions. And another one that should absolutely not be forgotten and that we are seeing really is also another priority in Ukraine is access to abortion care. So these are things that IPPF partners are prioritizing and working on in emergency settings. I think just a quick reflection on the Ukraine crisis, and my colleagues here from Slovakia and Romania are going to have real frontline sort of experiences to share. But just as an overview, we are working across 7 countries and 15 partners. We are working with our member association in Ukraine, who has been working in reproductive rights for 26 years and is working on clinical management of rape training, commodities to facilities, awareness raising, safe abortion access for those displaced and affected by the crisis in Ukraine. We have partners in Poland who are working on gender-based violence support, safe abortion access, and LGBTQI support for transportation, safe accommodation, linking them to SRH services, linking to hormonal treatments, linking to HIV therapy for across all the partners for different refugee populations. So in Hungary, similarly, we have 3 partners working across those spaces. In Romania, we have SEX here. We'll hear more about them. And we're working also supporting partners on adolescent sexual reproductive health and gender-based violence. Moldova, we have a collaborative partner who is doing a lot on mobile clinics, looking for adolescent sexual reproductive health, doing hotlines on gender-based violence. And we may be launching some work with our partner, our member association, Bulgaria, as well, around safe abortion access, STIs, HIV too. So, and Suzanne is going to tell us about the work in Slovakia around information awareness and things like that. So it's really a diverse portfolio across multiple partners, but the real takeaway here is that this is such a unique response because it is driven by civil society. Civil society is on the front lines of this emergency. They were the first to respond, and they're still responding 3 months later. There were certain infrastructures and systems that are unique in this Ukraine crisis that you don't find in other emergencies. In other parts that made it so reliant on the civil society action. And so it was really a unique opportunity to support partners who we already are working with and operating with to leverage their local networks of women activists, doctors, psychologists, social workers, nurses, midwives, doulas, to really be able to scale and respond in a meaningful way and in a fast way. Whereas some of the more traditional actors, had to take some time to get their footing and to build those relationships. And that was already in place because our partners are already there before the crisis. And they're going to be there during the crisis, and they're going to be there after the crisis. So I think the question is now, how do we continue to support them to sustain these interventions and activities in a way where they're not also neglecting their ongoing core work for their communities and populations that they're serving in other ways, while still being able to be effective in this crisis. So I think I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. And as you alluded to, the advantage we have as an organization is that we are more or less everywhere, and there are more than 120 member associations around the world, and some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger. I think in Ethiopia we have 200 clinics in our member association and several thousand employees. In many of the European countries, we are rather small, like in Politikk, where we have about 13 staff. And that is also the case in most of Central and East Europe. So we'll hear from 2 of our partners here. And maybe before you start, maybe say a little bit about each of your organizations. Susanna, maybe you want to go first.
Sure. So hi, I'm Zuzana from Slovak Family Planning Association. And as you mentioned, we are a very, very small organization. Only from 2021, we have 2 staff members and around 15 volunteers, but most of them are youth volunteers or up to 30 years old. And yeah, so the situation in Slovakia around SRHR is really difficult because there are several like continuous law proposals to restrict access to abortion. So we are mainly focused on the CSE and lecturing the students or the teachers or the parents. And additionally to it, we need to kind of defend the access to sexual and reproductive health services each half a year. So it's quite difficult to do the activist role and even do your job. So it is, yeah. And with the Ukraine crisis, it just increased in the level of how the services are really necessary in our country, and how the people in power want to ignore the need or avoid to fulfill the need for the refugees or the Slovak women. I don't know.
Thank you. Maybe Gabriel, you can say a little bit about sex in Romania as well.
Hello, my name is Gabriel. I'm from the Society on Education on Contraception and Sexuality from Romania, on short sex. It's an old organization in Romania. Its foundation started after the fall of the communists in 1990. And since then, we started working on social and sexual and reproductive health and rights, including in the first years delivering services. In the past 15 years, things have changed. We've moved more on comprehensive sexuality education, information regarding contraception, on sexual and gender-based violence. We implement projects also in partnership with our sister organization, Sex and Politics from Norway. And as an organization, with the number of employees fluctuated. Now we are around 12 or 14, something like that. But we did not have till this crisis any humanitarian projects. So things changed a lot. But I will talk later about it.
Thank you. Maybe you can then say something in general about what is the situation when it comes to refugees in each of your countries. And we can keep in the back of our minds that by the end of last week, we had 17,764 registered refugees here in Norway from Ukraine.
So up to the late of May, around 400 people from Ukraine, 400,000 came to Slovakia, and only 72,000 from them registered in Slovakia and asked for asylum. And we were mapping a little bit with our partner organizations what were the cases of requests around women who experienced sexual and gender-based violence, and it was around 100 cases in Slovakia.
Gabriel.
The last data that I checked just today, yesterday, the border police said that we have 1.1 million refugees that entered Romania. So it's a very, very big number. We have the border with Ukraine in the north, where most of the refugees enter. But we also have the border with Moldova. Most of the refugees that enter Moldova exit through Romania and most of them try to reach Western Europe. The numbers are fluctuating, but keeping in mind that every day almost the same number of refugees enter Romania, let's say around 10,000, like it was yesterday. The biggest part enters in the border with Ukraine, and a small part from the border with Moldavia. Most of them live towards Western Europe, but this happened in the first days or the first months. You have to imagine that first the one with the wealthier ones try to escape faster. Now things have changed. And most of the refugees are the ones with limited possibilities and limited incomes. And most of them are coming from the southern part of Ukraine, from Odessa. They started bombing for a few weeks also in that part. So when we started seeing how we can meet the needs of refugees, at first you had one image, but now you can see that things changed a lot, and that they are in need of everything, not only for some products, but they need everything. They left everything back home, and they are entering the bordering countries with empty hands and even not proper clothes, for example, and sometimes. So the situation gets worse from day to day. There are also problems regarding access to medical services. Information in Ukraine, imagine that it's big population that comes in. It's very hard. Not all of them speak English, or just a few of them speak Romanian. So it's very, very hard to try to understand. Firstly, how can you help them besides some food or something to get dressed with?
Thank you. So every time one refugee arrives in Norway, there is 25 that arrives in Slovenia, and more than, oh, my arithmetic now, more than 500 that arrive in Romania. So it's quite a comparison. And when we know the debate in Norway around changes of budgets and so on, we can imagine what it's like. Slovakia is a much smaller country than Norway is, both geographically and in population, and still they have that enormous influx. It gives a little bit of perspective, I think. What has it meant for your organizations that you have seen these influxes? Have you been able to change some of your operations? Because I guess you were not really rigged for receiving refugees.
Well, our organization did not have capacity to go in the field. We had to partner up, or we just collaborated with the organizations in Slovakia who also defend the sexual and reproductive health and services in Slovakia. So we got in touch with them because they had some people at the border right directly at the day since the war, when the war started. And they were mapping the situation and finding out what is actually needed and what kind of cases are appearing there at hand. And we, during our meetings that we had online, we defined kind of the two needs that are necessary. One was the emergency pill at the border, the pill after, and in the Ukraine, because they were requesting it also to deliver it in the Ukraine. So we were finding the ways how to get it, and we were like the funds and the people who would buy this kind of emergency pill were not the problem. The biggest barriers was to actually be able to distribute it either in Ukraine or at the border, because you have to have special permission from the Ministry of Health, which was not in our, we didn't have anyone in a team, or the partner organizations didn't have anyone in the team who could actually be there and just give out the emergency pill to the people who need it. So this is something that legally stopped all the activities after weeks and weeks of discussions. But eventually now the partner organization is finally getting into some kind of collaboration with other organization that has local doctors, and they are building the project together and will probably implement it in the following time. And what we as an organization focused on was the information, as you mentioned already, about the sexual and reproductive health services in Slovakia, which are available for people, even though there are many barriers, and the services for people who are experiencing the violence, So we created a web page where there are listed contacts and locations of this kind of services in Slovakia. We translated into Ukrainian and English, and then created a QR code out of that webpage and send it to the organizations which are working at the border or in the centers where the refugees are accumulating. And we're hoping that the information was getting to the people who need it. So this was the only thing that we had the capacity to do.
Well, I can say that the production of that brochure on your website and the presentation of that during one of our executive directors meetings earlier on was what inspired us to do the same thing here in Norway. So I think it was useful. So we have Lotte here in the front who has drafted a brochure of similar nature that is currently under translation, as Christine was explaining before. So we've had meetings with UDI to ensure that this can then be distributed to refugees here as well. So it was for us a very good thing to do. So yes, and that's the kind of advantages you can get when you are in a bigger collaboration as well. So Gabriel, Romania, you've been able to do quite a few things.
Well, I will start with 23 of February when we just worked like we always do on our projects. Since 24th of February, things have changed, of course, but we still had our projects to implement. We are still overwhelmed, but the situation was frightening. So we tried to figure out how we can help beyond our projects that we are daily implementing. So we reached out and talked with IPPF and Julie, and we try to see how we can use our team, or how we can use our abilities to write a project and to implement a project towards helping refugees on sexual and reproductive health and rights. So at the beginning, you should know that we did not have any experience in humanitarian crisis. We do not had any cases in Romania in the past years. So we had to learn by doing it, by looking at other examples, or by talking with our colleagues and trying to figure out what's the best way to interact. We found out that the best way to interact is fast, because the crisis doesn't wait. The number of refugees are constantly coming from day one. They won't stop for you to finish your project. They are in constant need. We tried in the first part to see most of the refugees, or a lot of the refugees, come to Bucharest. So we went to talk with some NGOs, some institutions, and we also did some personal walks in the railway station and so on, where over 750 refugees arrive daily only at the railway station. And we try to see how our work can meet their needs. So we sort of trying to focus on pregnant women and women with children aged to 3 years old, because we try to localize our capacity of working. We cannot. It's impossible to work with everyone. It's a huge amount of work, and we did not have the capacity. So we focused on these categories, and we wrote the project. We will start these days implementing it. It started as an idea to help them reach services, medical services, because they need medical services, and it's very hard to reach. Imagine going in a country where you don't speak even English. The medical system, it's not in Romania. It's not, let's say, top. So it has some problems even for Romanians. Imagine having so many refugees in need that have to reach out medical services in Romania. So This is very important for us, and it's very important for them to have these services available free of charge, and to really reach them, because there are a lot of barriers between a refugee and the services. We will adapt constantly our work, because as we've seen, it's not something you can read from a paper and by magic make it done. But and the work focuses at least for now on some categories of people, and we will see if we can manage to extend it or to make it better in the next months.
Thank you, Gabriel. I will come back to all of you, so you have a chance to ask questions as we go along as well. But I will go a bit back to Julie first. You were saying quite impressive numbers about the changes that have happened, where you said you have a 5-fold increase in the number of people that you are servicing, from 1.2 to 6 million up to last year. I wonder, do you have any figures for what you expect to be able to do in Ukraine as we go along there?
Yep, thanks for that. So currently, and this, I think Gabrielle and Susanna both pointed on this, this is an evolving crisis. We're like definitely still in the beginning of this. I mean, and so the reason I'm saying that is because every day we are exploring additional opportunities to do new programming inside of Ukraine and outside Ukraine. In terms of inside of Ukraine, working with our member association, we are looking at targeting, well, we've already sent an enormous amount of commodities that covers around 250,000, population of 250,000, which we sent to hospitals and other primary health facilities within the first 4 weeks of the crisis. And that was these kits that have these equipment and medicines that are necessary for safe delivery, obstetric complications, post-rape care, abortion, post-abortion care. So we were able to cover a large population in terms of having those commodities and needs. The MA in their future will be working across 5 different regions. And these will be sort of east and south. Some of them will be direct conflict areas, but where we don't have access, we will be facilitating travel of health providers from those more inaccessible areas to participate in trainings in the safer accessible spots. So we'll be looking at about 16 facilities across 5 regions and supporting the training of 300 health providers on clinical management of rape, and providing that should be around 400,000 population in terms of the coverage that we would anticipate for those facilities. So it's a rather large reach. And on top of that, we have added in a safe abortion access. So that'll be ensuring access to medical abortion pills, to training for doctors on the manual vacuum aspiration, but also on telemedicine, because of the restricted mobility, doctors are now able to give counseling over the phone to people who are in need of medical abortion, to support them in that and those commodities. So through that, we're looking around 2,800 safe abortions will be enabled through that particular project. But every day, new opportunities are arising, and our MA in Ukraine has enormous capacity to absorb and scale programming and incredibly strong relationships with the government, with UNFPA and with other partners. So is very keen to continue to grow their work in the gender-based violence part, but also in obstetrics and abortion care.
I should just say that when we say MA, it means member association, just like Sexopolitik, we are an MA. So yes, thank you, Julie. In your introduction, you mentioned that NGOs have played and civil society has played a very important role in the beginning. And it has been very useful for us to have, to be a global organization with organizations already there on the ground. At the same time, you've sort of indirectly said something about other actors not being as efficient. So can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, I can always elaborate on that point. No, I guess having the perspective of how crises are operating in other parts of the world, one can then look at the Ukraine situation and see some unique characteristics around it, and sort of challenges that are not present in other emergencies around the world. And I think the one that comes most easily is the one around the UN infrastructure. And basically, with any type of emergency response, there is a United Nations infrastructure that supports coordination of partners with the government, with each other, in terms of prioritizing the work that needs to be done and enabling the partners to make their work more efficient, that we're avoiding duplication, that we're meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. And this exists in other emergency settings. And uniquely, it really struggled to take shape in this crisis, mostly because it was within the EU, which is fascinating on one hand, because it's one of the areas of crisis where I would say we actually have pretty good infrastructure, very good resourcing, comparable to the global emergencies in the world. There is a lot of opportunity, I think, and a lot of infrastructure that does exist that can enable supply chains to go through, commodities to run, and all of these things. But there were some things that were really specific to the EU, and most of that was because the United Nations doesn't have a strong presence in Romania, in Slovakia, in Poland, in Hungary, that could host and hold this space. But the other part of that is that some of the governments really weren't showing a lot of political will to support this response at a national level, which again was driving the reliance on the civil society to do this and the municipal governments. And without that national government engagement, support in the coordination part and the enabling, it really hindered the ability for people to quickly and effectively communicate, share information, share assessments, figure out what are the guidelines, the protocols to follow, who's doing what where, that's what we call it. Who's doing what where? How do we connect with each other? How do we get the people in need to know how to access these services and information? And it sounds really simple, and sort of, but it's so critical. It's so critical, and that has been lacking in certainly the early weeks of this response. And I think some countries have shown more leadership, like Moldova and Romania has gotten, things moving, but we still have places like Poland and Hungary that are just basically, dialing in or not dialing in to this response. And just on that note, particularly around sexual and reproductive health. So we're talking about places where there is already a constrained environment for civil society to operate, and a level of hostility towards sexual and reproductive health. And that's not only impacting the host populations, but also the refugees coming in.
Thank you. This is also sort of linking a bit to the debate that we've had here in Norway as well, where there has been a lot of attention around women that might need abortions, or like Susanna was mentioning, the need for a post day after pill, or to put it that way. But what you are saying is the issue of of the prioritization of SRHR by the governments. I don't know if you can say something about that for Slovakia and Romania as well. Susanna, yeah.
Well, the priority wasn't like, for example, the response from the Ministry of Health about like when we were requesting that, okay, this is the issue at the border, you should focus on it. They were like, okay, you can deal with it as an NGOs, but you have to do it first of all silently, and you cannot, for example, buy the products from the Slovak market, because then the Slovak pharmacists or the doctors will not have the pills they need in their daily work. So this was, as you said, it was based really on the NGO activists at the border, and yeah, the situation and the response of I mean, when our partner organization, which had the volunteers at the border, and they were publishing, for example, some cases, and to make even the public aware about this issue, and that is necessary for us to do something. They were getting a lot of negative messages, like want to provide another, like it was really, you want to provide another killing of babies, since it's
challenging, in other words. Yes. What about Romania? Julia is saying that Romania is a good example.
Julie is very nice. Romania is a very good example, and I promised I will thank the civil society first for their reaction. It is great to see how in a few hours, not just 100 or 200 of people, but thousands and thousands of people run at the border to take some food, to take pillows. It was cold at the start of the war. To see how they are taking refugees in their homes and so on. So this is a very, very good example. The government officials also were involved in the border situation, but relating to sexual and reproductive health and rights, there is not a big focus usually in Romania, not even regarding the normal population. Let's not talk about refugees. You don't have. It's not like it's not hard to reach as an organization or as an individual refugees with sexual and reproductive health and rights services, but it's hard. It's harder within the formal institutions. There are some formal institutions that got involved, mainly with childcare, for example, but still subjects like abortion, contraception are not even considered a subject when talking in this crisis, because everyone says that it's so hard to meet the needs, the normal needs at a border. So let's talk later when things will chill out about sexual and reproductive rights, not taking into consideration the real needs of the refugees that cross our borders daily. I will say again that yes, we are a good example. Overall, Romania had a very good response and still has. And I think that we should also see a little bit of optimism here. And this is why I think like our visit here and Julie's help and your warm welcome and so on, and your willing of understanding the real situation at the border made everyone stronger in face of this big crisis. And I think that the greater results will come in the next weeks, months, and even years, because as Julie said, even if the war stops tomorrow, the crisis won't stop. There are over 7 million refugees in the whole of Europe. Ukraine is mainly destroyed, so this crisis will stay in Europe for a long time. So we have to get organized, to be in touch with each other, and to be prepared to have a response on a longer term, to be efficient and to meet at least basic needs of most of the refugees, if not all.
Thank you. And of course, it's interesting for us, at least for me, to see when you see the list of the countries that receive the most refugees. And then Romania is number 2, Slovakia is number 6, with these extremely high numbers. And what Norway did was to respond to a response from Moldova, which is the poorest of these 6 countries, to take I think the figure was 5,000. And when we went to get the first refugees from Moldova, most of them didn't want to come to Norway. They wanted to stay in Moldova in those conditions that were there, which was, I think, for me and many here in Norway, a bit surprising that they actually chose to stay closer to their homes and in the hope that this war will end soon. And I think that's also maybe something that we can that gives us a bit of a reflection around this. Gabriel, you also said that you see a shift in the kind of refugees that come now, and that affects issues a bit. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, in the first months or 2 months, let's say, the wealthier Ukrainians chose to go to the Western Europe. It's totally understandable. It's normal. Even today, most of the refugees that enter Romania exit Romania towards Western Europe. But in the past weeks, because the refugees come from the southern part of Ukraine, from parts that were really destroyed, they usually come with nothing on them, and they are the ones that are close to their country. They either didn't want to leave but did not have what to do. For example, their house was destroyed, or either they want to go fast back home. We also have a big number of Ukrainians that go back in Ukraine every day. I think you can talk about even thousands a day that try to go back to their country. Some of them come back because they find that there's nothing left there, but still this shift is seen usually at the border, because you reach people that do not know English at all, so they prefer to stay near the borders, because at the border, you know, some of Romanians speak Ukrainian, some of Romanians speak also a little bit of Russian. They also speak, some of the Ukrainians speak Russian, and it's easier for them to adapt to these conditions. That's also what's happening to Moldova, which is overwhelmed with the number of refugees, but still it's a more familiar place for them to stay and hope to go back faster. I know it's harder to understand why not living for a wealthy country, but they did not want to leave Ukraine.
So we actually have a visitor here from our sibling organization in Denmark, Sex og Samfund, and I should mention that the first grant that went from IPPF to Romania actually came from money that was collected in Denmark. So it was appreciated during our preparation meeting here. So now you've heard that as well, Bjarne. But coming back to the issue of the governments in the receiving countries, and maybe particularly those that have a more restrictive SRHR legislation or more opposing, like Susanna said a bit with Slovakia is known for being sort of borderline Hungary and Poland. But then the biggest recipient of refugees is actually Poland, which we know is one of only 3 countries in the world that have actually made a stricter abortion law in the last few years, where most countries actually make their abortion laws better, like we hope we will do in Norway in the next couple of weeks, given the changes that were, or the mandate for this group looking at our abortion law that came yesterday. So we should sort of celebrate that here in Norway, but that's the trend. But Poland is against that trend and has a stricter law than Ukraine. How does that affect your work, that people come from a country which has sort of not a perfect SRHR legislation, but they have a better one than the one they come to when they come to Poland? How does that affect your work, Julie?
So I think what we're hearing from partners in Hungary and Poland, where, as you say, they do have much more restrictive laws and frameworks to operate within, is that many of the women coming from Ukraine who are seeking services are quite shocked at how difficult it is to access these services, and that so much so that they have suggested that there be greater awareness raising campaigns within Ukraine to alert people of what their rights would be upon crossing borders, in case this is something that they could at all take into consideration depending on their situation. So we're hearing this, and this is a major challenge. And basically, the main first line response to this is to increase awareness among women and girls immediately upon arrival on what rights they have in these countries and what information and services are available to them, and to support them navigating accessing those services within the legal frameworks of those countries. And what we're realizing is also in some ways unique in these countries in the crisis world, because on paper and in theory, these services are available and accessible to them and free to them under certain asylum and protective rights that they have. But in practice, navigating these health systems, particularly in areas that are much more constrained, like trying to get emergency contraception or post-rape care or safe abortion, is nearly impossible. And I remember, Gabrielle, when I was in Romania visiting, one of the partners said, "I'm a 30." This is an example, but basically, she's like, "I'm a 30-year-old woman in Romania, and it's hard enough for me to figure out how to get an appointment for contraception in this country. I can't imagine how hard it is for a woman who's just come over from Ukraine and doesn't speak the language and doesn't understand." So what we're doing is supporting the partners to do what we call warm referrals, where they don't just give information about call this number or, which is helpful, but they actually have opportunities to talk to them directly through hotlines and through in-person health points, and support them in making service appointments either online or by the phone, escorting them through this to the services in the clinics, and helping them actually through this process. And in many ways, sometimes also paying for the services, because in theory they're free, but sometimes they get prescriptions that aren't covered. And these are all timely issues. So we need to make sure that when we mean access, we really are enabling access along all those lines.
I can see we've passed the first hour, so I'll give you a chance to come from the public some questions. So while you prepare them, I'll put the last question to Julie before I open the floor for the rest of you here. During the last sort of big crisis that affected us in this way with refugees and so on in Syria, there was a challenge when talking about SRHR inside Syria, that there was a big opposition in Syria to providing these services. That does not seem to be the case in Ukraine, or is there also opposition to including SRHR services into the main response towards the situation or towards the refugees there?
Within Ukraine, we're getting an enormous amount of cooperation and input from the governments at the municipal levels, the regional levels, the national level. There's constant communication in terms of needs, assessments, requests for commodities, resources, support that are coming through the channels from the Ukraine government. So I think that there is a real recognition at this stage that these are life-saving services, and they are requesting everything from we need commodities to we need online trainings to we need paper to print protocols on how to refer somebody who just was raped to the right services. So just to say that the whole spectrum of needs is present in Ukraine, but those communication and will does seem to be there.
Thank you. So I'm looking at you now. Who's going to be the brave first one to pose a question or a comment to the debate we have here? There we go. Please state your name and question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bastian. My question was, you talked about the problems of having supply chains and getting the commodities to the right infrastructures, and some national states having some restrictive laws and attitudes towards it. How has the cooperation been with other NGOs who has maybe more traditional focuses besides sexual health? Has there been a good collaboration with those?
Julie, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, partnership is so key to every single emergency. And that's certainly true within a sector of or specialization of sexual health, but also beyond that. One example I'd say is that the supply chain into Ukraine was incredibly difficult to get going from the get-go. This was a lot of reasons. Poland was the best place to do this because of the warehousing, the roads, the infrastructure, the flights and things that were coming in. But there were a lot of regulations that made things very complicated, and there was a lot of congestion at the border. So it was very difficult to get those things going. But IPPF was able to work closely with a partner, International Medical Corps, who has an incredible supply chain capacity. They're much broader than sexual reproductive health. They do all sorts of health work. But we were able to do a large procurement of sexual reproductive health commodities and piggyback on their supply chain into Ukraine, while also being able to get inputs from the member association in Ukraine on which were the target facilities that were most in need for these commodities, and IMC was able to support that happening. So just to say, partnership is so key, but that's enabled through coordination mechanisms and also, I guess, yeah, relationships that exist already. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Bjarne Christensen, coming from the Danish sister organization and the IPPF member. So it's very, very nice to hear you talk about this very difficult issues. And I think taking this initiative is so important. And I just wanted to comment on actually also what you said, Julia, that having this conflict in Europe doesn't necessarily make it easier for working on our issues. And I think this is really a big challenge for us as a federation and member organization. How can we really use this chance to be much better, also to work in a European setting? And I think we need to continue this dialogue, and we are in close contacts, but this conflict will take for a very long time, I'm afraid. So we really need to have our cooperation in place and find out best how we can support each other and the organization. So this we really need to focus on also in the coming weeks and months. I'm glad our governments want to support this, and we just need to also use this momentum to find ways where they can support the sexual reproductive health and rights. And I know in Denmark, they have just, the all-party group has just posted questions on exactly these difficulties in the refugee communities in all the countries around. What do we know about the situation and how can we support it? So So there's a lot of focus, and we need to find out how best to do it. At the same time, and I don't know, it's another challenge, but what we also see is that all the attention, all the money is going to Ukraine and the refugees. So actually a lot of money are stopped for other global work on these issues. So I think it's really that the money comes from the same trunk is really a big catastrophe, and we need also in our advocacy to address these issues. And I know we should be very much aware of this. So, but thank you for taking up this discussion.
Thank you, Bjarne. I don't know if you want to comment on how we can be more efficient in addressing these issues as a learning point from what we're doing now.
No, it's a great point. And I think what I keep coming back to is trying to leverage the platform that the Ukraine crisis has now on the global stage and the interest in it, while framing the issues as these issues that women and girls and marginalized populations are facing related to sexual reproductive health and sexual violence are not unique to the Ukraine crisis. These are endemic in all humanitarian emergencies. And so how can we harness this focus, compassion, empathy, momentum, and make it felt and realized across crises and for populations beyond Ukraine, and not to miss that opportunity to identify that these are unfortunately barriers and challenges that we see across the board, but there are also solutions to them, and that's what we're here to provide. And but that any opportunity that these things are on the forefront of the news, that's an opportunity to advocate for people in crisis all over the world.
Thank you. Do I see some more hands here? Maybe I'll take the chance to ask you, because this is, I think it's a key point that is being raised here by Bjarne. Oh, sorry. I can't see so far back. Yes, go ahead. Name and question, please.
Thank you. It's more a comment, actually. I'm Berit. I'm still the chair of the board of Sexpolitikk. I was just reminded of when I was at the subcommittee on nutrition in the United Nations, the person from the World Food Programme told that during the Bosnian War, for the first time, the World Food Programme was providing sanitary pads, as if no other refugees, people menstruating people elsewhere would need sanitary pads. So the first time it was introduced as a necessary commodity was actually during the Bosnian War. So I was just thinking that this new crisis in Europe could kind of shed light to gender problems in the refugee situation. And it has some very unpleasant connotations, but I mean, if we leave that aside, can we see any good? It's actually a bit to what Bjarne was saying as well. Now we have a conflict close to us. Can we then realize some general problems in conflicts?
Julie or others? Do you want to respond?
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. Absolutely. I think it is interesting, but to highlight the gender inequity and impact in all crises is relevant. I think looking at the demographics of people impacted in this Ukraine crisis are particularly dramatic, though. I think we have 90% of the refugees are estimated to be women and children. We have 60% of the displaced populations within Ukraine are female. There is a very strong gender component to this Ukraine crisis that I think really does elevate the importance of sexual reproductive health and gender-based violence, and we can measure the disproportionate impact on women and girls in this crisis. But that thread can absolutely be pulled across crises all around the world. But I think there will be a lot to learn from this. And I do wonder whether, even though the demographics are just like, so apparent and staring us in the face, I still don't think that there's enough emphasis on sexual reproductive health and gender-based violence in this crisis. So it's like, what do we have to do? We still have a lot to do in the advocacy sphere to make sure that these are not underfunded initiatives and that they're recognized as being critical and life-saving. So this is a real opportunity to do that, but also to learn and apply across other settings.
Thank you. Can I follow up that question then by asking you a little bit in connection with the two last interventions? IPPF operates across a number of emergencies throughout the world. And as Bjarne was saying, many of the countries are paying some of the costs for the Ukraine crisis by cutting their support to other places. Can you say something about how it has affected your work in other places where there are these crises, that we have this enormous attention on Ukraine?
Yes, I mean, I think we're always operating in a competing resources space, and in the last year, we had COVID, which was a clear competitor to humanitarian work as well, and then we had Afghanistan, which is very much requiring of additional humanitarian aid. Yemen is ongoing. Ukraine is now at the forefront of the agendas for donors. I think, there are plenty of needs that we continue to have. I think there's I'll just raise the issue around Tigray, which is also a regional crisis, because there is a lot. I mean, Ukraine is a regional crisis. There are many countries involved in this. This is a large scale operation, as is Afghanistan, as is Syria, as is Yemen. But also in Tigray, there's the complexity of being regional across Sudan and Ethiopia and Eritrea, and IPPF is responding across all of those countries through our member associations as well for an enormous number of people in need. And it is a challenge. It is always a challenge to secure resourcing for these. And I know that we need to keep highlighting these other forgotten emergencies like Yemen, like Central African Republic, what's going on in the Sahel. These are not getting enough attention, and it's the responsibility is on us to continue to highlight this.
Thank you. Do I see anyone else? I can continue from here, but it's getting even more interested if I can challenge some of you to say something. You were, all three of you were talking about vulnerable groups. Now, I guess every refugee is a vulnerable person, and women and children maybe in particular. You were also talking about other groups like LGBTIQ communities, which is a group that we work a lot with. Can you say something about the situation in your countries or in the situation in your work, if you are able to do something for this group, or if this group is different from other groups in this situation? I don't know who wants to start. Should Gabriel start this time? Yes.
In Romania, there are we are a lot of there are more organizations, and there are some organizations that work specifically with the LGBTQI. So they got more involved. We thought that it's better for us to try to divide our work on our best knowledge, and to try as organizations to cover up all the refugees that cross our borders. So that's why I told you that we will focus now on pregnant women and women with children, because not other NGOs do not have the knowledge and the help we have in this regard. So that's why we try to divide our work and try to focus on some part of the refugees in the future. Of course, there are still some groups that need more of our attention than others. We will try to see how we will manage to be more comprehensive in our work and to reach more refugees. But yes, that's true. There are a lot of groups that need help. It's a problem for trans people to get through the border because they have ideas. Their national ideas are, let's say, if they had a surgery to change their sex, it's a problem to cross the border. And this were one of the situations that NGOs working with LGBTQI had a lot of things to also to work with the border police. Imagine that the border police are not so open-minded sometimes, and they usually refuse to let men pass the border regarding their IDs.
I think the situation in Slovakia is very similar. We have several NGOs which help or support LGBTI communities, and they were exactly dealing with this issue, exactly the same issue for transgender people. And the kind of the umbrella organization for this specific case is Amnesty International in Slovakia, which is working on that. And yeah, like the political or the rights of LGBTI people in Slovakia is not very pleasant as well. We don't even have registered partnerships, and around, I think from the latest research from the 2018, around 80% experience some form of discrimination. So
not so easy. Yes, Julie.
So I'll just speak about our partners in Hungary and Poland and Ukraine. So basically their work is a bit, it's rather holistic, and basically they work through communicating with LGBTQI in Ukraine who are planning to come across the border, but want support in understanding how they can do this safely, what kind of accommodation they can get that will be safe, transportation that will be safe, what sort of risks they might face, and also providing on the other side of the border safe spaces for information on access to services, access to housing, onward transport, and some of this is also around mitigating gender-based violence, because we know that this community is at higher risk for gender-based violence, and so supporting them in mitigation strategies and how they can safely travel and work. So, and much of it is also supporting them for onward travel out of those countries to other countries. Many wanted to go on to the Netherlands, on to Germany. But one of the great advantages of IPPF is that we are a community that spans all of these countries. And so they're able to connect them with other resources and other networks and other communities in the countries that are their final destination. So that's ongoing. And for those who decide to remain in Ukraine, to support their continued access to services and information related to sexual reproductive health and gender-based violence is really key. And also they're looking at providing safe shelter spaces as well within Ukraine.
Thank you. Did I see Lasse? I will not ask you to state your name since we've all seen you already, like
Okay.
I do with the others. So please, Lasse.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that you said earlier about the organization or the relief work among the refugees from Ukraine. You said that the United Nations didn't have a strong presence in Europe compared with their presence in other crisis areas. So that the organization were very much left over to the individual states. But does, sorry for my ignorance, but does EU, the European Union, have any presence or any infrastructure to help this refugee situation, or is it just on a very high governmental intergovernmental level?
Julie.
So my colleagues might want to add to this, but basically the UN would have, if any, a very small presence within EU countries. So it's understandable that their programming would be small, that if they have an office, only one agency might have an office with a very small program and a very small staff, and that they would not have the capacity for humanitarian response. So that was the situation in all of the EU countries. In Moldova and Ukraine, you did have a strong UN presence, and those coordination mechanisms and infrastructure were in place. And as a result, I think it did facilitate a more rapid, organized response among partners. So in any case, whether or not the UN is there, the national government has a critical role to play and would host, co-host, co-chair the key coordination mechanisms and meetings with the UN agencies. When you don't have national government presence and you don't have leadership and structure and strategy to guide those coordination mechanisms, and it becomes very challenging. And so that was absent in some of these countries, and that made it very difficult to operate. But additional to that, because many of the partners who were responding are part of civil society in countries that are not as inclusive of civil society in the first place, particularly on the sexual reproductive health front, it further hindered that. But there were ways to go about this. And essentially what happened is, where there was no coordination mechanism hosted by the UN agency, hosted by the government, this gap was filled by the civil society organizations who already had existing coordination meetings and relationships. And so they did that. They held those and they talked amongst themselves about how to do this until the UN arrived with their surge teams and kind of got their footing going. So this was a really critical part of what the civil society brought, was that they already had these existing networks and they used those in the initial weeks and months to really still launch a response, despite not having the more formal structures that we would see. You guys want to add?
Maybe just to give you an example, for example, at the Slovak border, it took the NGOs to organize themselves around 4 weeks, and there was no governmental influence or coordination from the above. And after those 4 weeks, there was coordination only in the sphere of registering the people who came to Slovakia, not other services. So, is it the same in Romania?
I tried to stay away about discussion. Yeah. It's true. I'm trying to keep on a tempered level, because I know it's hard for everyone, for the civil society, for the government, and so on. It's true at the beginning, and even now, you will see that in some parts the civil society has a better response than any other institutions. The civil society had it figured out faster how to do some things. Sometimes, and this is, shouldn't say, but sometimes the state intervention even made it harder for the civil society to do their great work. But that happened only in small situations. I don't want to generalize the subject because it would not be true. I think that everyone, this situation got everyone on the wrong foot. And I think everyone has to figure it out how to better deal, let's say, from now on. But yes, your question is it's valid. But it's hard to respond. It's different, although it's common in all the Eastern countries, because the institutions are not so well clinched towards the population, towards the native population. And some situations are, as Julie said, even I have problem accessing medical care in Romania, although it's free of charge, and everyone should and could reach. For example, blood tests. It can take a lot to get, even if it's an emergency. So then you have the option to go to the private clinics, which are very expensive. But yes, the private clinics function very well, at least very fast, at least, let's say, very fast. So you always have this dilemma, and you always see these structural problems, which are not now since the war started, but are way, they come from way back behind. And things will not change overnight now. It's even harder, maybe. Yes, a good question was, will we learn something better now after this situation? Yes, under emotions, people tend to react sometimes better than when relaxed. But I'm not sure if we will change so fast or so good. Of course, a change appeared and will appear, but I'm not sure, and no one can tell you if we'll have the good results out of our emotions, or our emotions will fade with no real results.
Thank you. Yes, Ella.
Yes, my name is Ella.
Oh yeah, sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that. Yes.
That-
What is your name?
You have already introduced me. So.
I did.
I was thinking about, I work in sex and politics with comprehensive sexuality education, and SRHR is, I mean, more than health services. It is also knowledge about contraception, knowledge about your body, the whole CSE sort of dimension. And this is more a question about CSE in general in crisis. How do we ensure that both youngsters and adults get the CSE that they need when arriving in countries where they don't know the language? This is maybe more for you, Julie, and maybe like in the future, how do we see us taking care of refugees in that way, making sure that this is facilitated?
So maybe I'll just start from sort of the prioritization of response, which is sort of agreed at a high level across the sector at certain, at a very acute place. What is the absolute minimum service delivery that needs to be provided to reduce excess deaths, excess injury? And so that's kind of how we frame and prioritize our work at an acute stage. And that would be around the pregnancy support, the sexual violence, the contraception. But that's not to say that what we're trying to do is move back into a comprehensive sexual reproductive health package. We don't aspire to only deliver the minimum, but we know that that has to guide us at particular points of a crisis to make sure once that's in place, then we can build back. And I think already in some instances, it's very relevant to look well beyond the minimum package that we would provide in a humanitarian crisis for reproductive health. And certainly IPPF has extensive experience in CSE and doing CSE in protracted emergencies. We have not tested and documented CSE in sort of an acute phase of an emergency where we still have not yet, the full beyond the minimum package. But I think there's a lot of scope to see how can we scale up our CSE work and in different environments. And certainly, I think the Ukraine crisis provides a great platform to do that, not only because I think there are places where you already have a level of stability, but also because you have children who are still going to school. I mean, it was surreal to see in just a few days after the February 24th crisis, going to Moldova and going into one of the refugee centers where there was a room that was dedicated to the children. They all went in and they were all on their phones and iPads attending the Ukraine school. Their teacher was in Poland, they were in Moldova, and school was in session. And the school session had just restarted the previous Monday, and this was going to carry forward. How do we optimize that platform? How do we, there's a lot, I think, of scope to be creative there. But just to say, I think, yeah, I'd be interested to see what the interest is in that. But the other part is because many of our partners who are in this region, CSE is such a core part of their work. So if there's anyone who's well positioned to be creative and expand and look at this, it would be our MAs in this region. So.
I think before I go to you, I think Ella said CSE is comprehensive sexuality education, sexualitetsundervisning, just so that since I'm supposed to explain all abbreviations here. But yes, maybe you want to say something.
In Slovakia, the International Organization for Migration actually reached out to us because they are creating the program in the refugee center in one city, and they were asking if we can do the CS comprehensive sexuality education in Ukrainian if we have lecturers, and we said no, but we can definitely translate you some materials, and they are already like doing some activities in this. So I think this is also, and I also talked to Caroline about this in the future project. So I think there will be activities and maybe some innovative activities in this field.
Caroline is the boss of our European office. Yeah, yeah, Gabriel.
Yes, unfortunately, we are not in the state of Slovakia to even talk now about comprehensive sexuality education. That's the truth. Although in Bucharest now, in one or two schools, they started real school. They get the kids in the school class. I think around 300 kids are attending school in Bucharest with Ukrainian teachers. There are also refugees. One of the main problems really is the barrier of language. Kids do not know any other language than Ukrainian. Or most of them, let's say. So one of the problems is the language barrier. Yes, this can be passed with taking a teacher. It's great to have these ideas, and even after this visit, we will focus on trying to talk with the institutions that made this possible, the schooling for Ukrainian kids possible. Maybe they will take into account talking with teachers, refugees that might have information regarding SRHR subjects, or maybe we can help them with documents because in IPPF we also have translated in Russian, for example, or I think even in Ukrainian. So we can help. We can give them these materials so they can pass information to kids. So it's a great opportunity to even for us to have a clear mind of what can we do in the next step. So thank you for all these ideas.
It will soon be your last chance of taking the floor before I end here. But just to add to what Gabriel and Susanna said here, that when we were in the process of making this brochure for Ukrainian refugees, when we talked to the Ukrainian association here, they actually asked us to add a paragraph around what will their children be learning in school, because some of the parents are skeptical to what is being taught in the schools here in Norway. So we've added our own little paragraph about CSE, sexuality education in the schools here in Norway, because that was a request from the Ukrainian Association. And there is actually an own program here in Norway with Ukrainians. Like we had 6,500 Ukrainians in Norway before the war, where they're actually doing things on education, where they're also, where we've said that we'll add a bit about sexuality education when this is all over to ensure that there is a bit more than that of that in Ukraine as well. So yes, do I see any more hands? I have 2 more questions myself, and then there is a final round of comments from the 3 of you, so you can think about if you want that. I don't see any. Then the first one is, there are big Roma populations in Ukraine and in the neighboring countries, and those were not fleeing at first, but you have now seen an increase in that. I can see. What does that mean for the response that you are giving? Now I'll start at the far end, Gabriel.
Yes, that's true. And these situations, the state institutions did not react very well. For example, there are in the North Railway Station, they are not treated the same like the other Ukrainian refugees, or not every time, but there are some times in which you can see differences between Roma, Ukrainian Roma population and the rest of the refugees, which is at least, let's say, a big problem with, but it's a structural problem. Like I talked with you earlier, it's the same problems we have in our society for a long time. And you can see it also in the refugee crisis. It's not something new. It's not something we don't fight with. It's not something that happens every time with every Ukrainian, with every Roma Ukrainian refugee, or with every Roma Romanian, for example. But yes, it happens, and it's a thing that we should all try to think about, and how we can help them. Because imagine you are a vulnerable group. You came in a country, you don't know the language, and even the ones that help your neighbors or the people from the same bus will treat you differently. This is even worse for them. So yes, it's a very, very valid question with very, very hard answers and solutions.
Susanna.
Well, the Roma population in Slovakia belongs to one of the poorest. They even live under the poverty level. So, and regarding the SRHR services, they face a lot of discrimination in the hospitals. So yes, so they are again coming to really not welcoming space in Slovakia, and the levels of barriers are multiplying when they're from Roma community. So.
And Julie, maybe you can say something. The sort of so far very welcoming situation. Do you think that can change when we see that a bigger part of the refugee community arriving is from the Roma population?
Yeah, I mean, I've also had these conversations with partners around the Roma population, and one of the partners that we have in Hungary is a midwifery doula network, and they have doulas who operate within the Roma community. A doula is a birth attendant, so not somebody who is there to support the woman throughout the birthing process, who is an advocate for the woman, so and can do some antenatal visits in advance and provide psychosocial support and emotional support for the woman throughout the pregnancy and birthing process. And this is a number of Roma doula are part of this network. And so they are supporting those Roma refugees who are coming over into Hungary to make sure that they're identifying pregnant women and supporting those women and being able to access safe delivery care and antenatal care and postnatal care in the health system in Hungary. But having that common language, having that common culture, and recognizing that without this targeted support, they may very well fall through the cracks. This is an area that we felt was really important to support. Because as Gabriel was saying, they don't always benefit from the same information, the same services, and some of them come across with no documentation, which may also be limiting for them in registering in certain ways. So a lot of these things are taken into account, and these doulas are supporting them holistically across these different areas.
So with no hands that I can see, my last question is to Susanna and Gabriel. As we said briefly in the beginning, one of the big discussions here now, we're hoping tomorrow our finance committee will come back with proposal for how we are going to change our budget in 2022 to enable us to get these refugees to Norway. And as Bjarne was saying, one of the proposals from the government is to take from other conflicts. Has there been any discussion in Romania or Slovakia where you take so many more refugees on the cost? Who is paying for this, and does that affect the openness or the willingness to take these people? You're saying that the health, Gabriel said the health services in Romania is already problematic before you get 1 million other people passing through your country. So does that affect people's willingness? And is there a discussion around the cost this has for Romania as a country?
As I said earlier, when emotions are in place, people are still more empathic. But after several months and so on, people will, at least for now, it's the discussions are not so. They are trying to find solutions and not trying to just as a nationalistic way to let's be for ourselves. Now we are still trying to figure out how can we get more to help others. But these situations will change if the crisis will go further. And it's a real fact that the money problem will soon start to be at least at a state level institution big problem. Now for every refugee, if you take them in your house, you will get money from the government, for example, which is great. It helps a lot in this situation, although not everyone applies for that money. It's great that some of them still take refugees without any money from the state. But you know, Romania is not so rich, and people are starting to lose to have material problems, and when you have problems with your kids, it's harder to focus even on refugees or in crisis. So I think that these problems will get more discussion in the next months. And I think, yes, we have to be prepared for those steps to make a damage control, because if the society will get polarized, and if you have extremist views regarding we should focus on us and so on, because it's a crisis, and you've seen that the prices are getting higher and higher. We have a problem accessing normal petrol prices, for example. It's like €2 the price of petrol in Romania, which of gas for cars, which is huge for us. Imagine that in a few months, when the winter will come, we'll have to pay the bills, and suddenly maybe I won't say that the empathy will go down, but it will be harder even for us to get through the winter, and it will be even harder for Ukrainians. And as I told you, this crisis will not end soon, even if the war will.
Thank you, Susanna.
So, for example, the social security for the refugees in Slovakia can be accessed only when you register as an asylum seeker. So, from out of the 400,000, the 72,000 registered, and they increased the budget for like the allowances for women with children with 50 euro or something like that, which is not that, it's altogether like 200 euro per month, which doesn't really help you. And you can also access, when you ask for the asylum, you can access the healthcare system, which is for free. But then again, for example, the average price for the abortion is around 400 euro. So, and it's very similar, the political situation in Slovakia, that the politicians are more focused on Slovaks and helping the Slovaks, and creating the politics which are more focused, which have really nationalist focus, and creating policies which are focused on families, which are traditional families, etc., etc. So,
but the attitude is still not one that where you discuss that it's a problem because of the costs. No. So that's a uniquely northern problem. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to give you the chance for a last round, and I'll start with Julie. So if you have any comments that you feel you haven't been able to say, or any conclusions, or maybe in particular, if you have anything to say around where do we go from here? Is there any role that Norway has or Politikk has that you could maybe share with us? And if it's possible to be a bit optimistic in the last round, that would also be nice. That's not an obligation, though.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and thanks for these great questions and comments. I guess I think that the role of sex and politics and around advocacy, and especially continuing to applaud, but also push the Norwegian government to continue to be a leader and champion of SRH and gender-based violence in humanitarian settings is so key. Ultimately, it comes down to the political will of governments to ensure that reproductive health rights are respected. And that's true among the refugees that we're seeing from this Ukraine crisis. And that political will is influenced by other key players in the space and other governments, and the great advocacy works that's being done by civil society across this whole region. So just to say that I think that what I've seen in terms of solidarity has been really incredible across the member associations, not just in this region, but across the Federation. And also not the way in which it's being looked at is beyond the crisis. And it's really seen on what we're seeing in some of these situations is an exacerbation of an existing oppression of reproductive health rights in some of these countries that are receiving refugees. And it's leading to continued barriers for refugees. But let's not forget about the local and host populations, and about the Polish women, about the Romanian women, about the Hungarian women, about and the populations of Slovakia, and the realities that they face every day, and look at sustainable ways to make the work and advocacy that we're doing now last longer and be more impactful across those populations too.
Thank you. Susanna, any last words?
yeah, I think that the Norwegian advocacy is very important even for our organization. So I'm really grateful for that. And to be a little bit more positive, I see a little bit of opportunity for Slovakia to actually address all the specific SRHR problems, and to just make people aware of it. It's sadly because of the Ukrainian women, but it can just increase the the importance that we have to discuss this issue, not just for Slovak women, but also for all the people who are entering our country. So I think this would be very important role also for Norwegian, for Sexopolitikk or Norwegian government to address these issues and make us all care about them.
I don't want to repeat. I agree with what Julie and Susanna said, so I don't want to repeat the same things. But my optimistic idea is that what I've seen in the last 3 months and 2 weeks or so, that although we have the evil, the crisis, the bad situations with us or near us, we figured out a way to get more coalized, to be more united. And I'm not talking only in the countries near the border, but have you seen how everyone talks about and how everyone asks, how can we help you, or what can we do to help you? And I think this is the thing that will this is the sun that started shining since the war started, and I think we have to realize that this is an opportunity for us as human beings all around the world to be stronger on our beliefs and to help each other more. And this is why I think that in this situation, for example, because we are here now, we will ask you for help if we find in the next month that we cannot manage with some situations, because okay, you in Norway, you are, as we say, you are champions in this matter. So you have a lot of good practice examples which we can take back home and implement in our work. So yeah, I think that that's very important for us to keep each other close and to try never to forget that we are stronger together and we can win. The good will win if we are together.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I think this was very interesting and I have learned a lot. I can just end by saying that, yes, certainly I hope that you're right, that solidarity that we have seen during this crisis is something that we can hopefully bring further to future crises, and hoping that it will also sustain what we fear is a longer run than what we thought in the beginning. I will also promise you that we will continue to keep Norway an SRHR friendly country and to push our government and the NGOs here to ensure that they include SRHR as much as possible in their work, and that we remain a champion. I think together with our other Nordic countries, we're going to have a statement coming out from the 4 Nordic countries and the IPPF Secretary General during next week, where we will address some of these issues. So certainly that is something we're going to continue with. I can tell you a small story at the end, because when we talk about 6 countries that have received, the 6 top countries that receive refugees from Ukraine, we've only talked about the 5, because the 6th one is, of course, Russia. And Russia is something that we don't talk a lot about, but I can tell you that our biggest Ukraine activist in Norway is Russian. If you look at this picture you see to your right, it's a new material for secondary schools that we produced last year, because last year we changed our curriculum in Norway. Before, sexuality education was only from you are 6 until you are 16, but from this year we also have materials from 16 to 18 in sexuality education. So we had a drawing competition in secondary schools for who could be the one drawing the drawings for their materials. And the winner is called Paulina. She is from the north of Norway, but actually she is Russian. She came to Norway when she was 8. So when we are going in during the summer to launch a new material, which you see here in the middle, which is material on SRHR and older people, which is an area we also don't talk too much about. So we've asked Paulina to draw for that as well. We're using Paulina, so most of our things now have Paulina's drawings. And when she was asked to make some drawings for this, she said, yes, I'll do that. And that was in February. So on at the end of February, she said, I won't be able to finish this in time because there are so many demonstrations we are having against the Russian government now, so I will be too busy. So she asked for an extension for the drawings. So we gave her that extension, but it means that there is hope everywhere. And we should also remember that one of the problems we're having is in Norway, we have many Russians, and it's a little bit the discrimination that they face in schools and other places. And I think in all of this, we must remember that that is important as well. So I'll end with that. We're having a break now. So most of you have seen the toilets, which is down that way. And there is also some snacks, things to eat at the back. The bar is now open for those of you who don't want coffee, tea, and water is provided by us. If you want anything else than that, it's possible to get at the back in the bar at your own costs. And lastly, of course, they're pointing at these little bags here because I always forget to give out gifts to our guests. So thank you for that. So we're having a small little collection of things, including a cup, which is, of course, drawings with Paulina on it and other things. Thank you very much for your participation. No, that's yours, Julie. There's a little name on it. Sorry. Here is Susanna. They're very efficient, our staff here. So they have made it all. And I can tell you, it's also not entirely accidental that we have Slovakia and Romania on the panel. Of course, it suited very well because these are two of the 6 most receiving countries when it comes to refugees. But actually, at the end of last year, we started a cooperation with these 2 organizations, mainly on sexuality education and on violence against women, where we are exchanging experiences funded by what I call the Norwegian membership fee for not being a member of the EU, or other people call it the EEA money that goes to civil society. And we're increasingly trying to start that. Actually, I can see my predecessor, Solveig, is sitting somewhere there. She started this with a cooperation with Cyprus some years ago. We're now also going this year to start a second project with Cyprus. You'll be happy to hear. So that is something which will increase. So during Pride, we are going to invite people back, or they have invited themselves, some of them, but we'll see Slovakia and Romania here as well. You'll get invitations next week for our summer party, which will be on the 23rd of June during Oslo Pride, where we'll also look particularly at that. So we'll have a break now. I think we'll go until maybe 6:10, so that you have a chance to stretch your legs and breathe a bit before we start the AGM. And eat food. There is very much food at the back there. There is coffee and tea in the bar there with water. So thank you very much.